The screams still echoed in her ears as Sarah woke up with a start, her heart pounding against her chest. It was no longer a nightmare. It was a memory. The smell of smoke seemed to permeate his nostrils, even 3 weeks after the fire that destroyed the Sunshine Orphanage. Through the window of the small temporary apartment, she could see the sky dawning in shades of orange and red, colors that now made her shudder. On the table next to the bed, the diary that Lucas had found among his uncle Robert's saved belongings. Its yellowed pages contained cryptic notes about a pact sealed with blood and secrets buried in the foundation. Sarah knew she needed to decipher those words, but each discovery led her deeper into a maze of lies that stretched across generations. Now, an impossible choice presented itself: continue digging for the truth, risking the destruction of what was left of her community, or let the secrets remain buried, as so many had done before her. The digital clock read 5:33 a.m., the same time the fire had been contained 3 weeks ago. Coincidence or a divine reminder that some lights can only shine after the fire is extinguished? Have you ever wondered how much truth costs? What if price is all you know? The morning was surprisingly cold for that time of year in Oakridge. Sarah adjusted her scarf as she walked the grounds where the Sunshine Orphanage once stood. Only the basic concrete structure remained standing, blackened by the fire, a charred skeleton of what was once a home for dozens of children. The children were now temporarily housed in different houses in the community. Melissa Johnson, the principal, had transformed her own residence into a makeshift administrative center, coordinating visits, maintaining routines, and most importantly, ensuring that no child felt abandoned again. "I thought I'd find you here." Sarah turned to find Lucas walking toward her, 2 cups of steaming coffee in her hand. In the past few weeks, he had become her rock, her confidant, perhaps something else she wasn't ready to name yet. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. The warmth of the drink contrasted with the cold morning air. "The nightmares again?" She nodded. Since the fire, their nights have been disturbed by images of fire, screams, and, more recently, shadowy figures watching from the shadow. "I found something in the diary," she said after a moment, a reference to a previous fire in 1973. "Apparently, the building that existed on this land before the orphanage also burned down." Lucas frowned. "What kind of building was it?" "It doesn't say specifically. It only mentions that the flames cleansed the place of sin." "This is disturbing," Lucas commented, looking at the ruins in front of him with fresh eyes. "There's more," Sarah continued, taking the diary out of the pocket of her coat. "There is a list of names, 7 men who formed what Robert called the Circle. My grandfather is among them, and yours too." Lucas took the diary, examining the page it indicated. The names were written in careful handwriting: Thomas Miller, George Reed, Harold Thompson, Frank Wilson, Edward Davis, Joseph Carter, and Samuel Brooks. "I recognize all these surnames," Lucas muttered. "It's the founding families of Oakridge." "Exactly," Sarah agreed. "And look at the date next to the entrance, April 10th, 1973, 3 days after the fire mentioned." Lucas flipped through a few more pages, stopping at a particularly intriguing entry. "The pact was renewed today. Everyone swore to keep the secret, like our parents before us." TM seems hesitant, worried about the weight on his conscience. "I reminded him of what's at stake, not just our reputations, but the future of all of Oakridge. Some sacrifices are necessary for the greater good. The foundations cannot be disturbed." "What foundations?" Lucas asked, returning the diary to Sarah. "I don't know," she replied, putting it away again. "But I intend to find out." They walked in silence for a few minutes, skirting the rubble. Workers would begin cleaning the site next week, preparing it for reconstruction. The money raised at the concert, combined with insurance, which ironically Robert had tried to defraud, would be enough to build a new, larger, and more modern orphanage. "I spoke to Detective Collins yesterday," Lucas commented as they walked away from the ground. "They have not yet identified Robert's accomplice." Sarah sighed. The police had found clear evidence that his uncle had not acted alone. Text messages, calls to an unregistered number, and even witnesses who saw a second man leaving the orphanage just before the fire started. "I have a theory," she said, pausing to face Lucas. "What if it's not just one person? What if it's a group, the descendants of the original Circle?" Lucas considered the possibility. "Do you think they're keeping some kind of generational pact? That seems madness," Sarah completed with a sad smile. "A month ago, I would have agreed, but after discovering that my father and uncle embezzled money from orphans, that my uncle tried to kill us, and that there is a diary detailing a secret pact involving our families, well, my threshold for what sounds crazy has changed considerably." Lucas couldn't help but smile, despite the seriousness of the situation. Thompson. Fair enough. So what's the next step? We need to talk to the survivors, Sarah decided. Harold Thompson is still alive, isn't he? He must be almost 90 years old now. Yes, he lives in the Sunset Gardens nursing home. My mother used to visit him sometimes before. Lucas stopped, the pain of losing his mother still fresh. Sarah squeezed his hand gently. We will visit him today. If you're enjoying this story of mystery and faith, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any episodes of this exciting journey. Sunset Gardens was a well-kept establishment on the outskirts of Oakridge, with lush gardens and a view of the mountains that justified its name. Sarah and Lucas were greeted by a smiling receptionist who led them through hallways decorated with historical photographs of the city. Mr. Thompson doesn't get a lot of visitors lately, the nurse commented as she guided them. You'll be happy to see young faces. Sarah and Lucas exchanged apprehensive looks. They had made up a story about researching Oakridge's history for a community project, but they were both uncomfortable with the lie. Harold Thompson was sitting in a wheelchair by his bedroom window, watching the birds in the feeder outside. He was a small, frail man with gnarled hands and thinning white hair, but his eyes, when they turned to the visitors, were surprisingly lively and alert. Visitors? He asked, his voice stronger than his appearance suggested. I don't get many of those lately. Mr. Thompson, Sarah began, moving closer. My name is Sarah Miller, and this is Lucas Reed. We'd like to talk to you about the history of Oakridge. The old man's eyes narrowed slightly. Miller and Reed, I know these families. Thomas and George were my friends. Thomas was my grandfather, Sarah confirmed, and George was Lucas's grandfather. Harold studied the two for a long moment. You're not here for the overall Oakridge story, are you? They want to know about the circle. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. She didn't expect him to mention the circle so directly. Yes, she admitted. We found information that mentions a group called the Circle, formed by you and 6 other men, including our grandfathers. Harold sighed deeply, looking again at the window. I knew that this day would come eventually. Secrets have an expiration date, no matter how deeply we bury them. He gestured for them to sit in the nearby chair. What exactly do you know? He asked. Lucas took a copy of the, relevant pages of Robert's diary and gave them to the old man. Harold put on his glasses and scanned the pages slowly, his aged face revealing little of his thought. Robert Miller's diary, he finally said. I always thought he kept records. Very meticulous, that boy, even when he was young. Mr. Thompson, Sarah insisted gently. What was the circle, and what secret were you protecting? Harold folded the pages carefully and returned them. Before Oakridge was what it is today, it was just a small settlement. 7 families who came west in search of a new beginning. Our fathers, his great-grandparents, were devout men, determined to build a community based on Christian principle. He paused as if organizing his memory. In 1945, after the war, they built the first church. It was a moment of great pride for the community, but he hesitated. There was something they didn't want anyone to know, something that happened during construction. What happened? Lucas asked when the silence extended. Harold shook his head. I can't say. I swore to keep the secret, just like my father before me. Mr. Thompson, Sarah leaned forward. People died because of this secret. My uncle tried to kill me, Lucas and Melissa Johnson. He burned down the orphanage, and we believe that he did not act alone. The old man's face turned pale. Deaths? No, there should be no more deaths. The pact was to protect, not to destroy. Protect what? Lucas insisted. Or who? Harold seemed to, be fighting an internal battle. Finally, he sighed again, seeming to age another 10 years at that moment. I can't say everything, but I can point you in the right direction. He gestured for Sarah to come closer. In the municipal library, in the historical archives section, there is a box with documents from the foundation of Oakridge. Look for Elizabeth Reed's diary. Elizabeth Reed? Lucas repeated, surprised. My great-grandmother? Harold nodded. She knew. She wasn't part of the circle. No woman was, but she knew. And unlike men, she kept a record. Why are you telling us that now? Sarah asked. Because I'm too old to carry this burden, Harold replied, his voice trembling. And because maybe it's time for the truth to come out. But be careful, he warned, holding Sarah's arm with surprising force. Some of the children and grandchildren still believe in the Pact. They will do anything to keep the secret buried. Like whom? Lucas asked. Who should we fear? Harold let go of Sarah's arm and leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking exhausted. I can't say say anything more. I've broken my oath enough. Now please, let me rest. They left Sunset Gardens with more questions than answers, but with a clear direction. The city library and Elizabeth Reed's journal. I've never heard of that diary, Lucas commented as they drove back downtown. My mother never mentioned it. Maybe she didn't know, Sarah suggested. Or maybe he knew and chose not to talk about it, like everyone else. The Oakridge Municipal Library was a red brick building in the center of town, with white columns and large windows. The historical archives section was in the basement, a refrigerated space to preserve old documents. The archivist, a middle-aged woman named Margaret Davis, was hesitant when they asked about the city's founding documents. These files are not normally accessible to the general public, she explained, adjusting her glasses. They would need special authorization. It's for a research project, Sarah improvised, about the founding families of Oakridge. Margaret studied the two for a moment. Davis, she finally said. That's my maiden name. Edward Davis was my grandfather. Sarah and Lucas exchanged alarmed looks. Edward Davis was one of the names on the circle's list. Then you must understand the importance of preserving family history, Lucas tried, keeping his voice casual. A faint smile touched Margaret's lips. Yes, I fully understand the importance of family history, including which parts should be preserved in private. Her tone made it clear that she knew exactly what they were looking for, and she didn't seem willing to help. Miss Helena Sanchez Davis, Sarah said, deciding to change tactic. We know about the circle. We know about the Pact. What we don't know is why people are willing to kill to keep this secret buried. Margaret visibly paled. Kill? What are you talking about? My uncle, Robert Miller, burned down the Sunshine Orphanage, Sarah explained. He tried to kill us, and we believe he was acting to protect some secret related to the circle. That's absurd, Margaret protested, but her voice trembled slightly. The fire was a tragic accident. The police disagree, Lucas interjected. They have conclusive evidence of arson, and they know that Robert did not act alone. Margaret seemed genuinely distraught now. I didn't know that. I thought that it was a convenient accident, Sarah added. Like the 1973 fire that destroyed the building that existed before the orphanage? Margaret's eyes widened. How do you know about this? We know more than you think, Lucas bluffed, and we will continue to investigate, with or without your help. But innocent people can get hurt if we don't find out the truth soon. Margaret looked nervously around, as if afraid of being watched. Finally, she sighed. Wait here, she said, disappearing among the shelves of files. When he returned, he was carrying an old, dusty metal box. You have an hour, she informed, placing the box on an isolated table. And don't ever say that I was the one who showed you this. Without waiting for an answer, she quickly walked away, leaving them alone with the box. Sarah opened the lid carefully. Inside, there were yellowed folders, old photographs, newspaper clippings, and, in the background, a small book bound in worn leather. Elizabeth Reed's diary, Lucas murmured, picking up the book with reverence. They began to read, turning the fragile pages carefully. Elizabeth Reed had been an observant and articulate woman. His diary covered the years 1943 to 1947, detailing life at Oakridge during and after World War II. The first entries were mundane: the weather, the hardships of life during the war, worries about relatives at the front. But in March 1945, the tone changed dramatically. George and the other men began the construction of the church today. They are so proud, so determined to create a place of worship for our growing community. But I fear that the chosen terrain is not suitable. There are stories about that place, stories that the natives tell in whisper. George says they are only pagan superstition, but I saw the fear in the eyes of the old man who came to warn them. A few pages further on, an even more disturbing entry. Something terrible happened today. The men were digging the foundations when they found, I can't even write. George returned home covered in dirt and with a look I had never seen before. They made some kind of pact, vowing never to talk about what they found. But I heard Thomas Miller say that no one can know that we built the house of God on this. What did they find on that land? Sarah and Lucas continued reading, absorbing each word with increasing horror. The following entries described how the men began to meet secret, calling themselves the Circle, how they became increasingly obsessive about protecting their secret, how the church itself, built to glorify God, became a monument to something much darker. The last entry, dated December 1947, was the most disturbing. I can no longer live with this knowledge. The weight is too great. I tried to convince George to tell the truth, to seek redemption, but he says that it is too late, that the harm is already done. It says that our children and our children's children must keep the secret to protect Oakridge. But how can a community thrive when its foundations are stained with innocent blood? May God forgive us for what we have done. May God forgive what we allowed to continue. The diary ended abruptly there. There were no more entrances. Innocent blood, Lucas repeated, his voice almost a whisper. What did they find in the foundations of the church? Sarah was about to answer when she noticed something strange. A page had been partially torn out of the diary, leaving only a small strip next to the binding. Someone removed a page, she noted, showing it to Lucas. He examined the place. It seems recent. The cut is clean, not worn like the rest of the book. Sarah looked around nervously. Someone didn't want us to read that particular part. Margaret, Lucas suggested. Or whoever checked the diary before us, Sarah replied. We need to find out what was on that page. They continued to examine the contents of the box, finding photographs of the church's construction, official founding documents of the city, and newspaper clippings celebrating the opening of the first Oakridge Temple of Worship. One clipping in particular caught Sarah's attention. It was from a regional newspaper dated April 1945 with the title, Bones Found on Construction Site. The story was brief, mentioning only that human remains of undetermined origin had been found during excavations at Oakridge and that authorities were investigating. There is no follow-up to this story, Lucas noted, searching through the other clipping. No conclusion of the investigation, because there was never a real investigation, Sarah concluded. The circle has secured that. The sound of approaching footsteps alerted them. Margaret returned, her face a mask of false cordiality. Time is up, she announced. I need to keep these documents now. Sarah and Lucas exchanged glances. They had discovered a lot, but crucial pieces of the puzzle were still missing. Thank you for your help, Sarah said, standing up. It was very enlightening. As they left the library, Lucas held Sarah's arm, slowing his pace. She'll let someone know, he muttered. Whoever is keeping this secret now will know that we are investigating. Good, Sarah replied with determination. I want you to know. I want them to come out of the shadows. That's dangerous, Sarah. More dangerous than arson? She questioned. They have already tried to kill us once. At least now we are prepared. When they arrived at the parking lot, Sarah noticed a dark car parked across the street, the driver partially hidden behind sunglasses. As soon as he saw them, the car drove off, disappearing quickly. Did you see that? She asked Lucas. Yes, he replied grimly. I think we just met our observer. Don't forget to leave your like and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode. The mystery is just beginning, and you won't want to miss any detail of this journey of faith and discovery. The sun was already setting when Sarah and Lucas arrived at their father's house. After the discoveries in the library, they had decided it was time to confront him directly. As the son of Thomas Miller, one of the original members of the Circle, he must have known something about the secret that so many were willing to protect at any cost. Pastor James Miller greeted them with evident surprise. Since the fire, his relationship with Sarah had improved slightly, but it was still marked by caution and emotional distance. Sarah, Lucas, he greeted them, opening the door wider. I didn't expect visitors today. The house looked different to Sarah, emptier somehow. His father had sold many of the furniture and valuables to help pay for his legal defense and repay some of the embezzled money. What was once a stately residence now seemed just a shell of its former splendor. We need to talk, Sarah said bluntly, sitting on the worn sofa in the living room. About the Circle, her father's face visibly pale. What? The Circle, Lucas repeated, standing upright. The secret group formed by our grandfathers in 1945. The group that made a pact to hide something they found during the construction of the church. James Miller moved slowly to an armchair, suddenly looking much older and tired. How did you find that out? Robert's diary, Sarah explained. And then Elizabeth Reed's diary. And Harold Thompson gave us some clues as well. Harold is old, his mind wanders, his father tried to argue, but without conviction. Dad, Sarah said firmly, Robert tried to kill us to protect this secret, and he did not act alone. We need to know the truth before anyone else gets hurt. James ran his hand over his face, a gesture Sarah recognized from her childhood. It was what he did when he was deeply troubled. I don't know all the detail, he finally said. My father never spoke openly about it. He just told me when I took over the leadership of the church, that there was a secret that needed to remain, buried for the good of all. What secret? Lucas pressed. Something about the foundations of the church, James replied. Something they found when they were digging. My father said only that it was a stain on Oakridge's past, and that revealing the truth would destroy the faith of many and ruin the town's reputation. They found human bones, Sarah revealed. We saw a newspaper clipping from the time. James nodded slowly. Yes, I knew that, but they were not just ancient bones or an Indian cemetery, as the newspaper suggested. Era something worse. What? Sarah and Lucas asked, almost in unison. James hesitated, clearly struggling with the weight of the secret he had carried for decades. Before Oakridge was officially founded, this valley was used by another type of community, a group that called itself the Purified. They were some sort of extremist religious cult led by a man named Ezekiel Blackwood. I never heard of them in the official history of Oakridge, Lucas Sue commented, because they were deliberately erased from it, James explained. When our grandfathers arrived here in 1940, the valley seemed uninhabited. They didn't know that just 5 years earlier there had been an entire community in this place. What happened to them? Sarah asked, though she feared the answer. Officially, they dispersed after the death of their leader. But the truth, James took a deep breath. The truth is that there was a massacre. It is not known exactly who was responsible. Some say it was the army, others that they were vigilantes in neighboring towns. The cult had kidnapped children from the region, performed disturbing ritual. When our grandfathers started digging the foundations of the church, they found a mass grave. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. A mass grave? In the same place where they built the church? James nodded darkly. They didn't know what to do. Reporting to the authorities would mean investigation, delays in the construction of the city, possibly even the abandonment of the site. So they made a decision. They reburied the bodies deeper and continued construction on them. My God, Lucas murmured, horrified. They built a church over a mass grave and simply, did they move on? It wasn't that simple, James defended. They held private memorial services, prayers. They believed they were consecrating the land, transforming a place of death into one of life and worship. But they kept it all a secret, Sarah pointed out, anger rising in her voice. And they passed this secret on to their children, and their children to their grandchildren. A lie perpetuated for generations. It was to protect the community, James insisted. Can you imagine what would happen if people found out that our church, the Oakridge Spiritual Center, was built on the bodies of victims of a cult? The truth would have been better than decades of lies, Sarah replied. It's certainly better than murder and arson to keep the secret. James seemed genuinely shocked. Murder? No, the pact never included violence. It was just about discretion, about protecting the history of the city. Well, someone has decided to take the covenant to a new level, Lucas interjected. Robert was not acting alone when he burned down the orphanage, and we believe it was because something related to this secret was about to be discovered. The orphanage, James muttered, as if he had just made a connection. Of course. It was built on the same land where the old community center once stood, which burned down in 1973. Another convenient fire? Sarah asked. James nodded slowly. There were rumors at the time. The community center was being renovated. They were digging to expand the basement when they found more remains. Then the circle decided that another purifying fire was needed, Luke concluded bitterly. And now, 50 years later, history has repeated itself with the orphanage, Sarah added. But why? What has changed? Why did Robert and his accomplice decide to act now? James seemed genuinely perplexed. I don't know. The pact was about silence, not violence. Robert has always been the most zealous in protecting the family legacy, but I never thought he would get to this point. There must be something more, Lucas reflected. Something specific that they feared would be discovered during the reconstruction of the orphanage. Sarah stood up abruptly, an idea forming in her mind. The plants! Dad, do you have the original blueprints for the church or community center? Not here, James replied, surprised by the question. But they should be in the church archive. Why? We need to see exactly where the foundations have been laid, she explained. If we compare it with the plans of the orphanage and the new planned building, we can identify areas that have never been disturbed, Lucas added, understanding his reasoning. Areas where they could be evidence not yet discovered. James seemed reluctant. Even if they find these plants, what do they intend to do? Dig through the land in search of human remains? If necessary, yes, Sarah replied firmly. These people, whoever they were, deserve a proper burial and recognition, and the families of the victims deserve to know the truth. After almost 80 years, James questioned, what good would that do now? Justice has no expiration date, Dad, Sarah replied. And the truth, no matter how painful, is always always better than a comfortable lie. James watched his daughter for a long moment, as if he was truly seeing her for the first time. "You've changed," he finally said. "I had to change," she replied simply. After a moment of silence, James stood up. "The keys to the church are in the kitchen drawer. The files are in the basement, in the metal cabinet at the back. You'll find the plants there. Won't you come with us?" Lucas asked, surprised. James shook his head. "I can't. I've broken a lot of votes, betrayed a lot of trusts." But he hesitated. "If you really find something, let me know. Maybe it's time for Oakridge to face his past once and for all." Sarah hugged her father briefly before leaving, the first genuine physical contact between them since the scandal. It was not complete forgiveness, but it was a beginning. Are you enjoying this story of mystery and redemption? Leave your like and activate notifications so you don't miss the outcome. Your support motivates us to continue bringing you inspiring content. The church was quiet and empty when Sarah and Lucas arrived. Since the scandal involving Pastor James and Robert, the congregation had shrunk considerably. An interim pastor led the services while the church council decided the future of leadership. Sarah felt a strange discomfort as she entered the building that had been practically her second home all her life. The memories, good and bad, seemed to whisper from the wall, from the pew, from the pulpit, where his father had preached for decades. "The basement is over here," she indicated, guiding Lucas through a side door and down a narrow staircase. The church's basement was surprisingly large and organized, with file shelves, Sunday school supplies, and carefully stored seasonal decoration. In the background, as his father had described, was a large gray metal cabinet. Locked, Lucas realized, trying to open the door. Sarah examined the set of keys her father had given her. It must be one of these. After a few attempts, they managed to open the closet, revealing decades of church documents, financial records, meeting minutes, baptism, and marriage certificates. "Here," Luke pointed to a drawer marked Property and Construction. Inside, they found folders organized chronologically. Sarah took the oldest ones, dating from 1945, while Lucas looked for those from 1973, when the community center was built. "I found the original church plans," Sarah announced, unrolling a large, faded blue paper on a nearby table. "Look at this. There are handwritten notes in the margin." Lucas approached, examining the document. The annotations, made in pencil in a tight handwriting, indicated changes to the original project. "Foundation strengthened in the northern section," Luke read. "Additional depth needed for stability. Or to bury something deeper," Sarah suggested, dark. Lucas continued to search through the folders until he found the plans of the community center. "Here, 1973. And look, more notes on areas to avoid during excavation." They placed the two plants side by side, noticing a clear pattern. Certain areas of the site had been consistently avoided during construction. "Now we need the plants from the orphanage and the new project," Sarah said. Lucas leafed through a few more folders until he found the most recent documents. "Here is the orphanage, built in 1975, and these are the preliminary plans for the new building, dated 3 weeks ago." When they put all the documents together, the pattern became even more evident. While previous constructions had carefully avoided certain areas of the site, the new orphanage project included significant expansion, with foundations that would extend precisely into the previously untouched area. "That's why Robert has acted now," Sarah concluded. "The new construction would expose exactly what they spent decades hiding. But we still don't know exactly what it is," Lucas pointed out. "We know there are human remains, but why so much secrecy? Historical massacres, as tragic as they are not uncommon in American history." Sarah frowned, thoughtful. There must be something else, something specific about these victims or how they died that would make the discovery particularly devastating for Oakridge. As they pondered this, a noise upstairs alerted them. The door of the church being opened and closed. "Your father?" Lucas whispered. Sarah shook her head. "He would have warned us." Silently, they turned off the basement light and hid behind a bookshelf. Footsteps descended the stairs slowly, deliberately. "Miller? Reed? I know you are here. I saw the car outside." The voice was familiar, but Sarah couldn't immediately identify it. A flashlight swept through the basement, its beam of light dancing across the wall. "I'm not here to hurt you," the voice continued. "I just want to talk." Lucas shook Sarah's hand, signaling for them to remain hidden. But something in the tone of her voice made Sarah reconsider. "Frank?" she called, acknowledging at last. "Frank Wilson?" The flashlight light stopped, then moved to illuminate the switch. The basement light came on, revealing Frank Wilson, a middle-aged man, church council member, and son of one of the original members of the circle. "Sarah," he sighed, looking relieved to see her. "And Lucas, thank God you are fine. What are you doing here?" Lucas Lucas asked, still suspicious. Margaret Davis called me, Frank explained. I said you were investigating old things that should remain buried. Sarah took a step forward, staring at him. You're part of it, aren't you? You keep the covenant like your father before you. Frank looked uncomfortable, but he didn't deny it. It's complicated, Sarah. Some truths do more harm than good. How the truth about what happened to the purified, she challenged. About the mass grave under the church? Frank turned pale. I see that they have already discovered a lot. Not enough, Lucas interjected. Who was Robert's accomplice? Was it you? No, Frank exclaimed, looking genuinely horrified. I never agreed with violence. When I heard what Robert was planning, I tried to dissuade him, but he was obsessed. It said it was our sacred responsibility to protect the legacy of the founders. So did you know that he planned to burn down the orphanage? Sarah accused. Not exactly, Frank replied, looking away. He spoke of taking drastic measures if the reconstruction project went ahead. I never imagined that he really... Would you try to kill us? Lucas completed coldly. Frank ran his hand over his face, a gesture of deep weariness. You don't understand the weight of this secret, what it would mean for Oakridge if the truth came out. Then explain it to us, Sarah challenged. What exactly are we looking for? What is there under that ground that is so terrible as to warrant murder? Frank looked at the plants, scattered on the table, then at Sarah and Lucas. He seemed to be making a difficult decision. It wasn't just the cult members who were buried in that ditch, he finally said. They were also his murderers. Sarah frowned, confused. What? The official story is that the purified were dispersed or fled after the death of their leader, Frank explained. The truth is that they were massacred. Men, women, children. Everyone. By whom? Lucas asked, though he feared the answer. For the founders of Oakridge, Frank replied, his voice almost a whisper. Your great-grandfather, our great-grandparents. They didn't find a mass grave when they got here. They created it. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. Sarah felt as if the air had been sucked out of the basement. That can't be true, she finally said. Why would they do that? The purified had kidnapped children from the area, Frank continued. They performed disturbing rituals, sacrifices. When one of the Bay kidnapped children turned out to be the daughter of Thomas Miller, his great-grandfather. He gathered the other men and came after the cult. But when they arrived, it was too late for the girl. What happened next? He shook his head. It was described as divine justice in the diaries I read. In fact, it was a massacre driven by revenge. And then they built a church over the bodies, Lucas concluded, horrified. To hide his crime, to redeem the place, Frank corrected. At least that's how they saw it. To transform a place of death and sin into a sanctuary of life and worship. Sarah tried to process everything. The men who founded Oakridge, who established their reputation as an exemplary Christian community, had begun with an act of unspeakable violence, and then they literally built their city on this lie. Why the orphanage? She asked suddenly. Why build an orphanage specifically on that land after the 1973 fire? Frank gave a sad smile. Penance. The second generation of the circle, our parents, felt the weight of what they had inherited. Building a home for abandoned children on the same site where children had been sacrificed. It was a form of redemption. A redemption built on lie, Lucas remarked bitterly. Yes, Frank agreed, surprising them. And that's why I came to meet them, because I think it's time for the truth to come out. Sarah stared at him, suspicious. Why the change of heart? Because Robert crossed the line, Frank replied. When I heard about the fire, what he tried to do to you, I realized that the Pact had become something monstrous. We are no longer protecting the community. We are perpetuating a curse. Who was his accomplice? Lucas asked directly. Frank hesitated. Edward Davis Jr., the son of Edward Davis, grandson of the original member of the Circle, and Margaret's brother, the librarian, Sarah muttered. That's why she was so upset when we mentioned the fire. She doesn't know about her brother's involvement, Frank explained. At least I'm not sure. The Davis family has always been the most dedicated to the Pact after the Millers. Where can we find Edward Jr.? Lucas asked. That's the problem, Frank replied, sounding genuinely worried. No one has seen him since the fire, and I have reason to believe that he didn't finish what he started. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode. The mystery is deepening, and you won't want to miss any detail of this journey of faith and redemption. Night had fallen over Oakridge when Sarah, Lucas, and Frank left the church, each carrying copies of the blueprints they had found. The plan was simple, if risky. Locate Edward Davis Jr. before he could do any more damage. Where did we start looking? Sarah asked as they walked to the parking lot. Edward has a hunting lodge in the mountains, Frank replied. It is isolated, without electricity or telephone. A good place to hide. We should call the police, Lucas suggested. Frank Frank shook his head. With what evidence? All we have are theories and ancient plans. Also, the police chief is married to a Thompson. We don't know who else is involved in the pact. Sarah didn't like the idea of acting without authority, but she understood Frank's reasoning. The pact had stretched for generations, infiltrating all of Oakridge's power structure. All right, she decided. We go to this hut, but only to observe. If we see Edward, then we call the police. Frank nodded, looking relieved. We can use my car. It's a tall vehicle, better for mountain roads. As they headed to Frank's car, Sarah noticed movement in the shadows near the side of the church. Instinctively, she stopped. What's wrong? Lucas asked, following her gaze. I thought I saw. She started it, but then dismissed the idea. Nothing, just nervous. The journey to the mountains was tense and silent. Frank drove, occasionally pointing out local landmarks and sharing stories about the region, as if trying to normalize the extraordinary situation they found themselves in. My father used to bring me hunting here, he remarked as the car climbed up an increasingly steep dirt road. He said it was important to know the land that our ancestors had chosen. Did he talk about the pact? Lucas asked from the back seat. Frank nodded. Not directly, not until I was older, but there were always hints, warnings about protecting the family legacy, and some truths that must remain buried for the good of all. How did you find out the whole truth? Sarah asked. When my father was dying, Frank replied, his voice softening with the memory. He called me to his bed and confessed everything. I said I couldn't leave with that weight on my soul. But you still kept the secret, Lucas remarked, without accusation in his voice, just noting a fact. Yes, Frank admitted. For years, I believed it was the right thing to do, that revealing the truth would only cause more pain, destroy reputations, shake the faith of many. But now, he sighed deeply. Now I see that the secret itself has become a curse worse than the truth could ever be. The road narrowed even more, becoming little more than a trail between dense trees. Frank turned off the headlights and continued moving forward slowly. We're close, he whispered, as if he could be heard outside the car. The cabin is just around that bend. He parked the vehicle in a small clearing, hidden among bushes. Let's walk from here. No flashlights. The night was clear, with a nearly full moon providing enough light for them to navigate the narrow trail. The silence of the forest was occasionally broken by the chirping of an owl or the rustling of small animals in the understory. After about 10 minutes of careful walking, they spotted the hut, a rustic wooden structure with a sloping roof and a chimney from which a thin line of smoke came out. He's here, Frank whispered, crouching behind a fallen tree. Sarah and Lucas imitated him. The cabin had 2 windows visible from its angle, both emitting a faint orange glow, probably from oil lamps or candles. What do we do now? Sarah asked, her heart racing. We watched, Frank replied. We confirmed that it is indeed Edward, so we went back to town and alerted the authorities. They remained motionless for nearly half an hour, watching the hut in silence. Occasionally, a shadow would pass through one of the windows, someone moving inside. We can't stay here all night, Lucas finally whispered. We need to make sure it's him. I'm going to come closer, Frank decided. You two stay here. No, Sarah protested. It's very dangerous to go alone. I've known Edward since we were kids, Frank argued. If it's him, I can convince him to surrender peacefully. Before they could protest further, Frank moved silently toward the cabin, keeping crouched and using the shadows as cover. Sarah and Lucas watched, anxiously as he approached one of the windows, rising slightly to peer inside. For a moment, everything seemed fine. Then suddenly, Frank turned toward her, his face a mask of panic. He opened his mouth to shout something, but before any sound came out, a figure emerged from the shadows behind him, a metallic glow in the moonlight, a weapon. The sound of gunfire echoed through the forest, scaring away birds that took flight from nearby trees. Frank fell, a dark stain spreading quickly on his shirt. Frank, Sarah screamed, forgetting all caution. Run, Lucas ordered, pulling her by the arm. They threw themselves into the forest, stumbling over roots and branches in the darkness. Behind them, they heard the door of the hut open and heavy footsteps following them. This way, Lucas whispered, pulling Sarah behind a large oak tree. They crouched down, trying to control their panting. The footsteps approached, accompanied by the sound of branches being pushed away. I know you're here, a male voice called out. Edward Davis Jr., presumably. We don't need to make it harder than it already is. Sarah felt Lucas shake her hand, signaling him to remain silent. The footsteps continued, passing dangerously close to his hideout, then gradually moving away. When the sound disappeared completely, Lucas whispered, "We need to get back in the car. It's our only chance to get out of here." And Frank? Sarah asked, tears in her eyes. Lucas shook his head darkly. We saw where he was. Hit. There's nothing we can do for him right now. With heavy hearts, They began to move silently through the woods, trying to get around the cabin and return to the trail that led to the car. The moon occasionally disappeared behind clouds, plunging them into almost complete darkness. After what seemed like an eternity, they spotted the car where they had left him. They were only a few feet away when a branch snapped behind them. "Don't move." The voice was calm, controlled, and unmistakably threatening. Sarah and Lucas froze, then turned around slowly. Edward Davis Jr. was less than 10 paces away, a shotgun pointed in his direction. He was an ordinary-looking man, average height, gray hair, face that could belong to any middle-aged household, except for her eye. Cold, calculating, with a glint of fanaticism that Sarah recognized immediately. "Edward," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "it doesn't have to be this way." "You don't understand, Sarah," he replied. "He never understood. Your father tried to protect you from the truth, but you insisted on digging, on exposing old wounds. Wounds that never healed because they were hidden," she countered. "Secrets that poisoned generations." Edward laughed humorlessly. "What a poetics! Just like her father in the pulpit. But truth is rarely poetic, Sarah. It's dirty, ugly, and sometimes it needs to remain buried. Like the people your ancestors slaughtered," Lucas intervened. "Like the children who were sacrificed by the cult?" Edward narrowed his eye. "So you guys really figured it out. One more reason for this to end here. Killing us will not bury the truth," Sarah argued. "Other people know. My father, Harold Thompson." "Old men that no one will take seriously," Edward dismissed. "Without concrete evidence, it's just stories of confused seniors." "And the plant? The diaries?" Lucas challenged. "Accidents happen," Edward replied coldly. "Fires, floods, old documents are so fragile." Sarah then realized the extent of the plan. It wasn't just about preventing the excavation of the orphanage grounds. It was about eliminating all evidence and witnesses that could expose the truth about the founding of Oakridge. "Why?" she asked, trying to buy time as her mind desperately searched for a way out. "Why is it so important to keep this particular secret? Historical massacres, as horrific as they are not uncommon." Something flashed through Edward's eye. Hesitation, perhaps. "It's not just about the massacre," he finally said. "It's about what came after, about how Oakridge prospered when all the surrounding towns were fighting, about the blessings that seemed to rain down on our community." "I don't understand," Lucas said. Edward sighed, like an impatient teacher with slow student. "The pact was not just about silence. It was a literal pact, with blood. The founders believed they had made a deal. Spiritual, blood for prosperity, silence for blessing." Sarah felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold of the night. "You're saying that they believed they had done some kind of supernatural pact? They just didn't believe it," Edward replied. "It worked. For decades, Oakridge prospered while other towns languished. No droughts when the region suffered, no epidemics when diseases ravaged neighboring communities. Even during the Great Depression, no one went hungry here." "That's crazy," Lucas muttered. "Is that so?" Edward questioned. "Or is it faith? Isn't that what the Bible teaches us? That sacrifices bring blessings? That blood has power?" "Not like that," Sarah protested, horrified. "This is not Christianity. It is a perversion of everything Jesus taught." "It worked," Edward repeated doggedly. "And it kept working until people like your father and you started questioning, exposing, weakening the pact. The embezzlements of money," Sarah suddenly realized. "The financial problems of the church. You interpreted them as signs that the blessing was running out." Edward nodded. "The pact was unraveling. Robert and I realized we needed to renew it. A new sacrifice, a new silence." "The orphanage," Lucas muttered. "The children." "No," Edward exclaimed, looking genuinely offended. "We would never hurt the children. The sacrifice was the building, the symbol of our compliance, of our failure to keep the original pact." Sarah then realized the depth of the madness they faced. Edward and Robert were not simply men, protecting a historical secret. They were religious fanatics who believed they were fulfilling a supernatural covenant. "Edward," she said softly, as she would speak to someone on the edge of a precipice, "think about what you're doing. Frank is dead or seriously injured. You already have blood on your hands. That's not what God wants." "You don't know what God wants," Edward screamed, his composure finally breaking. "You, with your convenient faith, your selective morality. Sometimes God requires sacrifices. Abraham was ready to sacrifice Isaac. Jephthah sacrificed his own daughter. And Jesus sacrificed himself so that we would no longer need blood sacrifices," Sarah replied firmly. "That's the whole point of the gospel, Edward. The ultimate sacrifice has already been made." For a moment, something seemed to flicker in Edward's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or a glimmer of sanity returning. But then his face hardened again. "Beautiful words," he said coldly, "but they don't change what needs to be done." He raised his shotgun, pointing it directly at Sarah. "I'm sorry, I really do." Time seemed to slow down. Sarah saw Edward's finger pull the trigger, heard Lucas scream his name, felt her own body start to move. Too late. The sound of gunfire echoed through the forest, but it wasn't Edward's shotgun that fired. The sound came from behind them, and Edward staggered forward, an expression of surprise on his face. He fell to his knees, the shotgun slipping from his hand. Sarah and Lucas turned to see Frank Wilson staggering toward them, one smoking pistol in his hand and the other pressed against his bloodied chest. "Frank!" Sarah exclaimed, running towards him as he too fell to his knees. "Vest, bulletproof," he managed to say between painful breaths. "Gift from state police when I retired. Not as effective at point-blank range." Lucas quickly checked Edward, who was alive but unconscious, Frank's shot having hit his shoulder. "We need to get them to a hospital," he said, already grabbing Frank's car keys. "I called the state police," Frank informed, his voice weakening. "Before, follow you. They must be on the way." As if to confirm his words, the distant sound of sirens began to echo through the forest. Sarah pressed her own jacket against Frank's wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "Hang in there," she pleaded. "Help is coming." Frank smiled faintly. "I always knew that you were special, Sarah, since I was little, questioning everything. Your father, so proud." "Don't talk," she urged, tears streaming down her face. "Save your strength." Lucas had tied Edward's hands with his own belt, ensuring that he would no longer pose a threat when he regained consciousness. Now, he knelt next to Sarah and Frank. "Why did you follow?" he asked Frank. "I knew it was dangerous. I couldn't let you face it alone," Frank replied with difficulty. "My generation failed. We continue the Pact when we should have exposed the truth." The sirens were closer now. Blue and red lights began to flicker between the trees, illuminating the surreal scene in the forest. "It's not too late to fix," Frank continued, his voice little more than a whisper. "Truth liberates." His eyes closed, and for a terrible moment, Sarah thought he was gone, but his chest still rose and fell in shallow breaths. The next few minutes were a whirlwind of activity. State police officers stormed the clearing, followed by paramedics. Frank and Edward were quickly placed on stretchers and taken to ambulances. Sarah and Lucas were wrapped in blankets and taken to separate vehicles to give a statement. Hours later, exhausted and still in shock, they found themselves in the waiting room of Oakridge Regional Hospital. Frank was in surgery, his condition critical but stable. Edward was in police custody, his wound treated and less serious than it initially appeared. "Miss Miller, Mr. Reed," they looked up to find a state trooper standing before them, a middle-aged woman with discerning eyes and a confident demeanor. "I'm Detective Martinez. I'd like to ask a few additional questions if you're feeling well enough." Sarah nodded, though all she wanted was to sleep for a whole week. "Of course. We found something interesting in Mr. Davis's cabin," the detective informed, sitting across from them. "A trunk with old documents, letters, photographs, even recordings on cassette tapes. It seems that he was collecting evidence about what you already know. The foundation of Oakridge," Lucas added. "The massacre," the detective nodded. "Exactly. But here's the intriguing detail. He wasn't collecting this evidence to destroy it." Sarah frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "Based on his notes and what we've heard from the recording so far, Edward Davis Jr. was planning to expose everything," the detective explained. "He believed that the Pact had been broken when his father died last year, and that it was his responsibility to reveal the truth." "That doesn't make sense," Lucas protested. "He just told us he wanted to keep the secret, that the Pact needed to be renewed," the detective shrugged. "People under extreme stress often contradict themselves, or maybe he was lying to you. What we do know for sure is that his cabin contains what appears to be the most complete collection of evidence about Oakridge's true history." Sarah tried to process this new information. "And Robert, they were working together on the fire." "Yes, that seems clear from the messages we recovered," the detective confirmed. "But their motives may have been different. Based on what we have encountered so far, Robert seemed obsessed with the idea of purification by fire, while Edward talked about exposing the truth through the ashes." "So what really happened?" Lucas asked, frustrated. "Did they want to expose the truth or bury it?" Detective Martinez closed her notepad. "This is what we hope to find out in the coming day. Mr. Davis is conscious now, now, albeit on heavy medication. When he is in a position, he will be formally interrogated. She got up to leave, but stopped. Oh, and Mr. Wilson asked me to give this to you, in case he woke up from surgery before you could visit him. She handed Sarah a sealed envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten message. Sarah and Lucas, if you're reading this, it means I've survived, at least for now. There's something you need to know, something I didn't have the courage to say before. The Pact wasn't just about hiding a massacre, it was about hiding who really committed it. It wasn't our great-grandfathers who killed the cult members. It was their own leaders, including Ezekiel Blackwood, who ordered the mass sacrifice of their followers when they heard that the authorities were coming. Our forefathers arrived too late to save most of them, but they witnessed the last moments of the massacre. They killed Blackwood and his closest lieutenants, the real monsters, but they couldn't save the innocent followers who had already drunk the poison. Among the dead was Thomas Miller's daughter, who had been kidnapped weeks earlier. She had been forced to drink the poison along with the other children. The founders decided to bury everyone together and never talk about what they saw. Not to hide a crime they committed, but to hide their failure to stop it. And perhaps, too, to hide the terrible truth that some of the monsters were people they knew, neighbors, friends, even family members who had secretly joined the cult. The full truth is in a diary hidden under the floorboards of Harold Thompson's house. He told me about his existence years ago, but I swore an oath never to reveal him as long as he lived. You deserve to know the truth. Oakridge deserves to know his true past. Not to condemn, but to finally heal. With respect and admiration, Frank Wilson. Sarah finished, reading the letter aloud, then looked at Lucas, both trying to process this new twist. We need to go to Thompson's house, Lucas said finally. Sarah nodded, carefully folding the letter and putting it in her pocket. Tomorrow. Now we need to rest. As they left the hospital into the cold night, Sarah looked up at the starry sky. The truth was more complex, more nuanced than they had imagined. It wasn't a simple story of villains and heroes, but of imperfect people facing impossible circumstances, making decisions, some terrible, and then living with the consequences for generations. Are you enjoying this story of mystery and redemption? Leave your like and activate notifications so you don't miss the outcome. Your support motivates us to continue bringing you inspiring content. Harold Thompson's house at Sunset Gardens was quiet when Sarah and Lucas arrived the next morning. A nurse informed them that the elderly man was asleep, exhausted after a restless night. He was very distraught when he heard about the shooting on the mountain, she explained. We had to medicate him so that he could rest. We can wait, Sarah replied. Actually, if it's not a problem, we'd like to check some things in his room. Our distant relatives. The nurse hesitated, but eventually nodded. Just don't wake him up. He needs rest. Harold's room was simple but comfortable, decorated with old photographs and memories of a long life. The old man slept peacefully, his breathing deep and regular. Frank mentioned the floor, Lucas whispered, looking at the polished wooden floor. They began to examine the room discreetly, looking for loose boards or signs of a hiding place. It was Sarah who eventually noticed something, a little wear and tear on the floor under the dresser. Help me move this, she asked Lucas. Together, they carefully slid the dresser a few inches to the side, revealing a board that looked slightly different from the other. Lucas knelt down, pressing the ends of the board until it came loose, revealing a hidden space below. Inside was an old metal box, the kind used to store important documents. Sarah carefully removed it and opened it. The contents were astonishing. Not just one diary, but several, along with photographs, letters, and a small wrapping of fabric. The main diary, bound in dark leather with the initials TM engraved on the cover, belonged to Thomas Miller, Sarah's great-grandfather. With trembling hands, she opened the journal and began to read, with Lucas looking over her shoulder. The first entries described the journey west, the discovery of the valley where Oakridge would be founded, the ambitious plans for a model Christian community. Then, in March 1945, the tone changed dramatically. My dear Elizabeth has been missing for 3 days. Everyone is looking, but there is no sign of her. Mary is inconsolable. I fear the worst, especially after the rumors about the strange group that has settled on the other side of the valley. God, please protect my little girl. The following entries detailed the growing hopelessness, the discovery that other children in the area had also disappeared, and finally the terrible truth about the cult led by Ezekiel Blackwood. We found out today that Blackwood is no stranger to our community. He grew up in Millfield, just 20 miles from here. His real name is Ezra Black. Even more disturbing, several of his apostles are well-known people, including Jonathan Reed, George's cousin. How could they be seduced by such darkness? Sarah looked at Lucas, who looked pale. Jonathan Reed, would he be his relative? Possibly, he muttered. I've never heard of him in family history. They continued reading, absorbing the growing horror of the following entries, which culminated in the fateful day. May God have mercy on our souls for what we witnessed today. By the time we finally located the camp of the purified, it was too late. Blackwood had ordered a collective rise, his euphemism for mass suicide. We saw bodies everywhere, many still warm. Adults, children, all with the same dark liquid dripping from their lips. We find Blackwood and 5 of his lieutenants still alive, forcing the last reluctant followers to drink the poison. The vision awakened something primitive in us. I'm not proud of what we did, but I can't say I regret it. These monsters did not deserve earthly judgment. Then we found her, my Elizabeth, my precious girl still, breathing faintly, the poison not having completed its terrible work. We tried everything to save her, but it was too late. She departed in my arm, whispering that she loved me. What we did next, we did in a state of madness and despair. We couldn't let the world know that our own children had been sacrificed by a cult led by people from our own community. The shame, the horror, it would be unbearable. So we bury everyone together, victims and executioners, in a mass grave, and we swore never to talk about what really happened. We swore to build something good, something pure, on that place of death, as if we could somehow redeem what had been desecrated. Sarah closed the diary, silent tears streaming down her face. The story was even more tragic and complex than they had imagined. It was not simply a case of violent founders hiding their crimes, but of broken men trying to process an unspeakable horror in the only way they could conceive. There's more, Lucas said softly, pointing to the small bundle of cloth. Sarah picked it up and carefully unfolded the faded fabric, revealing a silver locket. It was a simple circle with a cross in the center, and engraved on the back was a name, Elizabeth Miller, 1937-1945. Thomas's daughter, she murmured, holding the locket as if it were something sacred. Look at that too, Lucas said, picking up one of the photographs. It was a black and white image of 7 men standing in front of a newly built church, the same church that still stood in downtown Oakridge. Their faces were solemn, without the pride that would normally accompany such an accomplishment. The founders, Sarah acknowledged. The original circle, a movement in bed, caught his attention. Harold Thompson had woken up and was watching them with tired but lucid eyes. You found it, he said, his voice weak but clear. Sarah approached the bed, gently holding the old man's hand. Yes, we have found the truth. Harold nodded slowly. My father told me everything when I was only 16. A burden too heavy for a boy. He said that the pact was necessary, that it would protect everyone, but it turned into something toxic, Lucas noted, moving closer as well. Yes, Harold agreed. With each generation, history has been distorted, the original purpose forgotten. What started as an act of traumatized men trying to protect their families from shame and pain has become almost religious, a cult in itself, like Robert and Edward, Sarah said. They believed that the pact brought supernatural prosperity to Oakridge. Harold closed his eyes briefly. The human mind is strange. When we don't understand something, we invent explanation. Oakridge prospered not because of some supernatural pact, but because it was founded by men determined to create something good after witnessing something terrible. What are we to do with all this? Lucas asked, indicating the diaries and documents. Harold looked at them with a surprising intensity for someone so fragile. The truth. After nearly 80 years, Oakridge deserves to know its true history. Not to condemn, but to understand, to heal. Sarah thought about everything they had discovered. All the lives affected by the secret. Not just the original victims, but generations of descendants who had carried the weight of a pact they didn't fully understand. Let's tell the truth, she decided. All of it. In the weeks that followed, Sarah, Lucas, and a recovering Frank Wilson worked tirelessly to organize all the documents, diaries, and evidence they had collected. With the help of state university historians and respected journalists, they compiled the true story of Oakridge's founding. Edward Davis Jr. survived his injuries and, surprisingly, cooperated fully with the authorities. As Detective Martinez had suggested, her intentions were more complex than they initially appeared. He had actually planned to expose the truth, but believed that this could only happen after a purifying horrifying sacrifice, the burning of the orphanage. In his troubled mind, only after the destruction of the physical symbol of the covenant could the truth be revealed. The full story was first published in the local newspaper, then reverberated in state and even national publications. As expected, it caused shock, outrage, and pain, but it also brought something unexpected: relief. Generations of descendants of the founding families finally understood the weight they had unconsciously carried. 3 months after the fire, the Oakridge community gathered for a special ceremony on the grounds where the orphanage had once stood. A memorial had been erected, a simple stone structure with the names of all the victims of the 1945 massacre, both the innocent followers and the children who had been kidnapped. Sarah watched the gathered crowd, familiar and strange faces, young and old, all united in a moment of collective recognition and healing. Her father was among them, thinner and more humble, but with a serenity she hadn't seen in a long time. Lucas approached, holding her hand discreetly. In recent months, their relationship had blossomed amid chaos and pain, like flowers that sometimes sprout on scorched ground. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Sarah nodded. As the organizer of the event, she had been asked to say a few words. She walked to the small podium, feeling the weight of all the eyes on her. "Oakridge was founded on a tragedy," she began, her voice clear in the morning air. "Our ancestors witnessed unimaginable horrors and, in their pain and confusion, made decisions that would affect generations. They buried not only bodies, but also the truth." She paused, looking at the attentive faces. "For nearly 80 years, we have lived on foundations of secrecy. We have built our lives, our families, our community on an incomplete story. And when secrets are buried for so long, they don't disappear. They rot, contaminating everything above them." Murmurs of agreement ran through the crowd. "Today, we are not here to judge our ancestors. We are here to acknowledge your humanity, your flaws, your imperfect attempts to create something good out of something terrible. And we are here to finally give rest to those who died, both the innocent victims and those who killed them." Sarah took Elizabeth Miller's locket, which she now wore on a chain around her neck. "My great-great-aunt Elizabeth was only 8 years old when she was taken from her family and forced to participate in rituals that no child should have to witness. Her father, my great-grandfather, spent the rest of his life trying to make up for his failure to protect her. He built a church, then a community center, and finally an orphanage, all on the same land where he lost it, as if he could somehow redeem that piece of land with good deeds." She looked at her own father, who had tears in his eyes. "Today, we started the construction of a new orphanage, not to hide the past, but to honor it, not to bury the truth, but to build on it, with foundations of honesty, transparency, and true redemption." When Sarah finished her speech, a reverent silence fell over the crowd. Then, slowly, people began to approach the memorial, laying flowers, lighting candles, some kneeling in prayer. Lucas joined her again, wrapping her in a gentle embrace. "That was beautiful," he whispered. "It's just the beginning," she replied. "True healing will take time." Melissa Johnson approached, accompanied by some of the children from the orphanage. The girl in pigtails who had waved to Sarah months ago, Lily was her name, held a small bouquet of wildflowers. "For you," she said shyly, offering Sarah the flower. "Professor Melissa said you saved our home." Sarah knelt down to be at the child's level. "It wasn't just me, Lily. It was the whole community working together." "But you started," Lily insisted with the simple logic of a child. "You didn't give up even when it was hard." The words touched Sarah deep. She accepted the flowers with an emotional smile. "Thank you. It means a lot to me." As the children moved away to explore the construction site, now marked with stakes and colored ribbons, Sarah noticed her father hesitantly approaching. "Can I talk to you a moment?" he asked. Lucas gently squeezed Sarah's shoulder and walked away, giving them privacy. "His speech was powerful," James began. "You've always had a gift with words." "Thank you," she replied, still not quite comfortable in personal conversations with him. "I've been thinking a lot over the last few weeks," he continued, "about truth, redemption, what it really means to have faith." Sarah waited, letting him find his own words. "I spent my life preaching about a God of truth and love while living a lie," he admitted. "Not just about the money, but about our family history, about the pact that my father passed on to me." "You were doing what you believed was right," Sarah offered, surprising herself with the compassion in her voice. "Maybe, but now I see that I was wrong," he replied. And I see something else. I see how you, even after discovering all these lies, even after your faith has been shaken to the core, still found a path to truth and compassion. He looked at the memorial, at the people gathered around it. You have not abandoned your faith, Sarah. You have purified it. It removed the layers of human tradition, hypocrisy, and lies, and found the core: love, truth, redemption. Sarah felt tears forming in her eye. I'm still figuring out what I believe, she admitted. But I know that I can no longer accept a faith based on appearances or on hiding inconvenient truths. Neither did I, his father agreed. That's why I officially resigned from the ministry. I'm going to serve my sentence for the financial crimes, and then, well, I'm thinking about working with ex-offenders, people who need a second chance, just like me. Sarah smiled, feeling an unexpected wave of pride. I think you'd be good at that. They remained silent for a moment, watching the community gathered, no longer divided by secrets, but united in a process of collective healing. I hear you're going to sing at the memorial service tomorrow, James commented. Sarah nodded. Rebecca and I have prepared something special. Why does he live? His father guessed. Yes, she confirmed. It seems appropriate. James smiled. Perfect, actually. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lived, all fear is gone, Sarah added. And for the first time in a long time, she truly believed in those words. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this. Your support means a lot to us. Share it with someone who needs to hear about redemption and second chances. A year has passed since the revelation of Oakridge's true story. The small town had changed profoundly, not just physically with the construction of the new Sunshine Orphanage, almost complete, but spiritually. A community that for decades had lived under the weight of unspoken secrets now breathed more freely. Sarah watched the transformation with a mixture of awe and humility. She had become, unwittingly, a spiritual leader of sorts to many in Oakridge. Not a pastor in the traditional sense, but someone people looked to when they needed to discuss issues of faith, doubt, and redemption. His own spiritual journey had been profound. After the collapse of her old certainties, she had rebuilt her faith brick by brick, examining every belief, every tradition, every interpretation. The result was something more personal, more authentic, a faith that embraced questions and doubts as an integral part of the spiritual path. The new orphanage was a symbol of this transformation. Designed with large windows that let in natural light, it had been built not to hide the past, but to honor it. A small museum on the ground floor told the full story of Oakridge, the good parts and the terrible parts, so that future generations could learn from the mistakes and triumphs of their ancestors. On that sunny spring morning, Sarah walked around the construction site, checking the last details before the grand opening scheduled for the next day. Lucas accompanied her, now officially the project director of the Sunshine Foundation, the non-profit they had created to run the orphanage and other community programs. The masons have finished the inner courtyard, Lucas informed, consulting his clipboard. And the furniture for the dormitories arrives this afternoon. Sarah smiled, admiring the beautiful masonry work of the central courtyard, a circular space with a small garden and benches, designed as a place of reflection and peace. It's perfect, she commented. The kids will love it. Lucas put away the clipboard and took Sarah's hand, a gesture that now felt as natural as breathing. In recent months, their relationship had blossomed, turning into something deep and lasting. Nervous about tomorrow? He asked. Sarah considered the question. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was to be a major event, attended by state officials, journalists, and virtually the entire population of Oakridge. A little bit, she admitted, but it's a good kind of nervousness, like before singing at the concert. Lucas smiled, remembering that day that seemed to have happened in another life. You're going to rock. As always, they continued their inspection, checking every detail of the new building. When they reached the East Wing, they found Melissa Johnson overseeing the installation of the last bookshelves in the library. Sarah, Lucas, she greeted them enthusiastically. Come and see how beautiful it looks. The library was one of the prides of the new orphanage, a large and welcoming space with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and comfortable reading areas scattered throughout the room. It's wonderful, Melissa, Sarah commented, admiring the space. The kids will love it. Speaking of them, Melissa said with a smile, they're counting down the minutes to move in, especially Lily. She's already decided which bed she wants and which books she's going to borrow first. The mention of Lily brought a smile to Sarah's face. The little one with the pigtails had become a especially close to her in the last year, frequently asking Sarah to read story or sing to her. "How's Frank?" Melissa asked, her tone more serious. "Getting better every day," Lucas replied. "Doctors say he will be able to get out of rehab in a few weeks." Frank Wilson had survived his injuries, although recovery was long and difficult. The shot had damaged his lung and several ribs, requiring multiple surgeries and months of physical therapy. But his determination was admirable, and he had become a vocal advocate for transparency and reconciliation at Oakridge. "He's confirmed he's coming tomorrow," Sarah added. "He said he wouldn't even need a wheelchair." "Stubborn as always," Melissa commented fondly. She and Frank had developed a close friendship over the past year, united by their shared experiences and commitment to the well-being of children. When they finished the inspection, Sarah and Lucas went out to the grounds in front of the orphanage, where workers were installing chairs for the next day's ceremony. The memorial to the victims of the 1945 massacre was just a few feet away, a constant presence, a reminder of the past that would no longer be denied or hidden. "I'm going to visit my dad," Sarah said, looking at her watch. "I promised to show him the speech I prepared for tomorrow." Lucas nodded. "Do you want me to go with you?" "No need," she replied with a smile. "I have some things to work out with him. In particular, James Miller had served 6 months of house arrest for his role in embezzling church funds. Now he was on probation and working as a volunteer counselor in a rehabilitation program for former inmates. The transformation in her life had been as profound as Sarah. A man who had once been obsessively concerned with appearances and reputation now dedicated his days to helping those society often ignored. Sarah found her father in the small apartment he now occupied in the center of town. It was a modest but welcoming place, so different from the stately house where she had grown up. "Sarah," he greeted her with a warm hug. "It's good to see you. How are the preparations?" "Almost finished," she replied, sitting down at the kitchen table where he had prepared tea. "It's going to be a great day tomorrow." "Absolutely," he agreed, pouring the tea in simple cups. "The whole city is talking about it." Sarah took a few sheets of paper from her purse, the speech she had prepared for the inauguration. "I'd like you to take a look at that, if you don't mind." James took the papers reverently, as if he understood the meaning of the gesture. For years, he had been the speaker, the spiritual leader, the one Sarah admired and emulated. Now the roles had been reversed in many ways. As he read, Sarah watched his face, noticing the new expression lines, the grayer hair, but also a serenity that was not present before. When he finished, there were tears in his eyes. "It's powerful, Sarah," he said, returning the pages. "Honest, moving, full of hope without ignoring the pain." "Thank you," she replied, feeling a warmth in her chest at the sincere compliment. "It means a lot coming from you." James took a sip of tea, looking contemplative. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about redemption lately, about how it rarely comes the way we expect." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, intrigued. "Well, I've spent decades preaching about redemption from the pulpit, using all the right words, quoting all the appropriate passages," he explained. "But I only started to really understand the concept when I lost everything. My position, my reputation, even his trust." Sarah nodded, understanding deeply. "True redemption doesn't come when we're at the top, but when we fall and discover that there's someone that sustains us anyway," he continued. "It's not about restoring what we were before, but about transforming ourselves into something new, something more true, like a phoenix rising from the ashes," Sarah suggested. James smiled. "Exactly, and Oakridge is going through that same process. We're not just rebuilding a building. We are rebuilding a community, an identity, a faith." They talked for another hour, discussing not only the speech and the ceremony, but deeper issues of faith, forgiveness, and purpose. When Sarah finally got up to leave, her father surprised her with a small box. "I wanted to give it to you," he said. "I found it among your mother's things." Sarah opened the box to reveal a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a musical note. "She wore it when she sang in the college choir," James explained, "where you two met. She always said she would save it for when you were ready to find your own voice." Sarah felt tears forming. Her mother had passed away more than 10 years ago, but the pain of loss could still be acute at times like this. "It's perfect," she whispered, holding the brooch to her chest. "I'll use it tomorrow." When she left her father's apartment, Sarah felt a sense of completeness that had been absent for too long. It wasn't that all wounds were healed or all problems solved. Far from it. But there was a peace in accepting the process, in understanding that redemption was a journey, not a destination. If you're enjoying this inspiring story, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Your support motivates us to continue bringing content that edifies and transforms. The day of the inauguration dawned clear and radiant, as if heaven itself wanted to participate in the celebration. From early on, volunteers worked on the final preparation, arranging chairs, hanging banners, preparing refreshments for the guests. Sarah arrived at the venue 2 hours before the ceremony, wearing a simple light blue dress and her mother's musical note pin pinned close to her heart. Her hair, once always tied in a stern bun, now fell in soft waves around her face, symbolizing her own liberation from the constraints of the past. Lucas found her near the podium, checking the sound system. He looked dapper in a gray suit, so different from the leather-jacketed man she'd met on that rainy night more than a year ago. "You're all set," he informed, kissing her soft. "The first guests are already arriving." Sarah looked up at the sky, breathing deeply. "It's really amazing, isn't it? After everything that happened, we are here." "We didn't just survive," Lucas commented. "We flourish." Gradually, the space in front of the new orphanage was filled. Oakridge residents, local officials, reporters, and even visitors from neighboring towns who had been touched by the community's story of transformation. The children of the orphanage, dressed in their best clothes, sat in the front rows, their faces beaming with expectation. Sarah spotted familiar faces in the crowd. Melissa Johnson, elegant in a floral dress, Frank Wilson, leaning on a cane but standing as he had promised, his father sitting discreetly in the back, Harold Thompson in his wheelchair, accompanied by a nurse, and even Rebecca Torres, who had traveled, especially for the occasion. At 10 o'clock sharp, the ceremony began. The mayor of Oakridge gave a brief welcome speech, followed by Melissa, who spoke emotionally about the significance of the new orphanage to the children and the community. Then Sarah's time came. As she stepped onto the podium, a respectful silence fell over the crowd. She looked at the faces in front of her, some familiar, some stranger, all united in that moment of celebration and renewal. "A little over a year ago," she began, her voice clear and steady, "a fire destroyed the Sunshine Orphanage. That night, as the flames consumed the building, something else was also being consumed, the lies and secrets that had defined Oakridge for generations." She paused, letting her words sink in. "The fire, which was lit with destructive intentions, ended up becoming purifying. It forced us to confront painful truths about our past, about the foundations, literal and figurative, on which our community was built." Sarah looked at the nearby memorial, then back into the crowd. "We discovered that Oakridge was born out of a tragedy, that our founders, facing unspeakable horror, made choices that would affect generations. They buried not only victims of violence, but also the truth about what happened." Murmurs of agreement ran through the audience. "But we also discovered something else," she continued, her voice softening. "We found that even in the deepest darkness, light finds a way, that even motivated by pain and fear, our ancestors tried to create something good and meaningful. They built a church, a community center, an orphanage, all on the same land where the tragedy occurred, as if trying to somehow redeem that piece of land with acts of kindness and service." Sarah touched her mother's pin, feeling connected not only to her, but to all generations of women and men who had sought meaning and purpose in the midst of grief. Today, we continue that tradition, but with one crucial difference. We do it in the light of truth, not hidden in the shadows of secrecy. This new orphanage is not built on lies, but on honest acknowledgement of our past and genuine hope for our future. She looked directly at the children in the front row, their faces attentive and solemn. "To you, children, I want to say this. This place is more than just a building. It is a symbol of how a community can face its darkest past and still choose the light, of how we can recognize mistakes, seek forgiveness, and build something new and beautiful from the ashes of the old." Sarah then addressed the wider community. "For all of us, this orphanage represents a second chance, not just for these children, but for Oakridge as a whole. A chance to live with integrity, to honor the truth even when it's painful, to build relationships based on authenticity rather than appearances." She paused, looking at Lucas, who was watching her with evident pride and love. "There's a song that says, 'Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lived, all fear is gone.' For a long time, I interpreted these words to mean that faith protects us from suffering, isolates us from pain. Now I understand that it is just the opposite. True faith gives us the courage to face pain, to cross the valley of shadow, to look the truth in the eyes without blinking." Sarah looked at her father, who had tears running silently down his face. "It is this faith, not a faith of easy certainties and simplistic answers, but a faith that embraces questions, doubts, and and complexities that has sustained us through this difficult year. It is this faith that has brought us together today, not as perfect people, but as a community of imperfect individuals seeking something greater than ourselves. She opened her arms in a gesture that encompassed not only the new building, but the entire community gathered. This orphanage is our collective testimony that light is stronger than darkness, that the truth, however painful it may be, is more liberating than the most comfortable lie. That love, imperfect, hesitant, sometimes stumbling, is still the most powerful force in the universe. Sarah smiled, feeling a wave of emotion that almost prevented her from continuing. So with gratitude for our past, with honesty about our failures, and with unwavering hope for our future, I declare the new Sunshine Orphanage officially opened. The crowd erupted in applause. The children jumped out of their chairs, screaming with joy. Melissa and several other people wiped away tears. Even the supposedly objective reporters seemed emotional. When Sarah stepped down from the podium, she was immediately surrounded by hugs, first from Lucas, then from Melissa, Frank, her father, and finally, pushing herself among the adults, little Lily. "I liked your speech," the girl declared with the direct honesty of the children, even without understanding all the words. Sarah laughed, bending down to be at the child's level. "Thank you, Lily. What was your favorite part?" Lily thought for a moment, frowning in concentration. "The part about the light being stronger than the dark," she finally replied. "Because it's true. Even a small candle can light up a dark room." Sarah felt her heart expand with the child's simple wisdom. "Exactly," she agreed. "And you know what? Sometimes the smallest lights are the most important." The ceremony continued with the ribbon cutting, followed by a tour of the facility for the guests. Children ran through the corridors, choosing beds in the dormitories, exploring the library, marveling at the playroom and the inner courtyard. Later, as the crowd dispersed and the workers began to dismantle the chair, Sarah found a moment of stillness in the inner courtyard. Sitting on one of the stone benches, she watched the small garden newly planted in the center, fragile seedling that would one day become vibrant flowers and sturdy shrub. Lucas found her there, sitting quietly beside her. For a few minutes, they simply existed together, absorbing the peace of the moment. "What are you thinking about?" he finally asked. Sarah smiled, looking at the seedling, and how everything starts small and vulnerable. These plants, the orphanage, our faith, even us. Lucas followed his gaze, understanding. "But with the right care, they grow strong." "Exactly," she agreed. "And sometimes the most significant growth happens after a storm or even a fire." Lucas took her hand, his finger intertwining naturally. "Speaking of growth and new beginning," he began, suddenly looking nervous. Sarah turned to face him, noticing the change in his tone. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about the future," he continued, "about how we found each other at the most unlikely time, how we grew together through it all." Sarah's heart raced as Lucas slid off the bench to kneel in front of her. "Sarah Miller," he said, his voice firm despite the evident emotion, "would you do me the honor of building a life together? To create our own family, our own legacy of truth and love?" From his pocket, he pulled out a small ring, simple yet elegant, with a single stone that caught the sunlight. Sarah felt tears of joy forming. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "Yes, Lucas Reed, I can't imagine a more beautiful journey or a better companion to walk it." As he slid the ring onto her finger, Sarah had a sudden sense of completeness, not because all the questions had been answered or all the challenges overcome, but because she had found someone with whom to face the questions and challenges that were yet to come. At that moment, as they kissed in the courtyard of the new orphanage, with the afternoon sun bathing them in golden light, Sarah understood the true meaning of the song that had become so important in her journey. "Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. And because I know that he controls the future. Life is worth living just because he lived." It was not a promise that tomorrow would be easy, but an assurance that no matter what came, they would never face it alone. And that, Sarah realized, was the true miracle of faith. Not the absence of storm, but the constant presence of a light that guides through them. Thank you for following this journey of faith, redemption, and renewal. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Remember, even in the ashes of the greatest tragedy, new lives can flourish when we allow truth and love to guide us.